Hi, it's Media Center Ukraine Odessa, and this briefing is dedicated to relations of Ukraine and African countries. Let me introduce you, Iryna Filatova, Africanist, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor Emeritus at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. It's such a pleasure to meet you, Iryna. Hi.
Very nice meeting you. Hello.
Thank you for your time. Please tell us about the attitude of African countries to the Russian-Ukrainian war. The floor is yours.
There are very many factors that define the attitude of African countries to the war, to Ukraine and to Russia. They are all different. One of the main factors is that they know Russia. They know Russia much better because it was always a big country with a very important and powerful propaganda. It positioned itself as a friend of African countries for many, many decades and helped African countries in their struggle against colonialism, against apartheid. It supplied arms, it supplied money, it supplied moral, logistical, and political support. All of it was very, very important for Africa as a continent and for each African country in particular. Their concrete attitude to the war is most obvious from the vote in the United Nations. As you know, the the vote in March last year, which was the first vote in the General Assembly, denouncing the Russian aggression against Ukraine, that vote was passed by the absolute majority of votes, and yet 20 out of African countries, there are 54 African countries in the United Nations, and only 28 of them condemned the invasion. This is 51%, and that compared the majority of those countries which abstained was also African, 17 out of 35. 8 African countries on top of that did not submit any vote, and one joined the countries which voted against that resolution, and there were only 5 of them, including Russia and Belarus. Why is that? I think I gave a few reasons. They know very little about Ukraine. Before the war, Ukraine maintained a very low profile in Africa, and of course, the supplies of grain and oil was important for many African countries, and yet this was not the reason why African countries would be interested in Ukraine or knew anything about it. And then the conflict itself, this is very far from Africa. You know, it's somewhere in Eastern Europe. What do they know about relations or history of relations between Russia and Ukraine? What do they know about civil war in former Yugoslavia, for example? Absolutely nothing. It didn't tell them anything. It doesn't answer any of their life's questions. And finally, the one more reason, which is very, very important, and that is the relations with the West. With the United States, with Europe. The European countries were former colonial countries, and the United States supported them very often in their policy. For example, the resolution against colonialism for the liberation of all colonies, which was initiated, by the way, by the Soviet Union. All the former colonial countries, such as Britain, Portugal, Belgium, they voted against, and the the United States voted against. So if the West supports Ukraine, that means that the African countries, the majority of them, would think that there's something wrong with Ukraine.
Thank you, thank you. In your opinion, how do you think, has the Grain Agreement changed the attitude of African countries to a war?
I don't think it did. You see, the Russian propaganda in that sense was again rather successful. Before the war, Russia was the biggest supplier of wheat among all countries which exported grain, and Ukraine was the fifth. Also, if you look at the list of countries where the grain is going, even now, Russia supplies Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Turkey, Libya, Pakistan, Sudan, Kenya. Ukraine supplies China, Spain, Turkey, Italy, yes, Egypt too, and Tunisia too, but Kenya to some extent. But Russia, in its propaganda, used the fact that it supplies more grain to more African countries than Ukraine. Again, African countries do not know much about how this grain deal works, and nobody is explaining it to them properly. Nobody explains why the grain is sitting in Turkey, for example, that Russia is blocking the passage of that grain, and the grain that was stuck in Turkey in February could feed more than 800 million people for at least 2 weeks. And that is very important, but that grain is not going. So these are the facts. These are the facts of perceptions in different African countries. Of course, Africa is not a continent. All countries are different, and these facts did not affect Kenya's attitude, for example, because Kenya supports Ukrainian war effort and its struggle against the Russian aggression. But generally speaking, this conflict, this war, is very far from the interest of the majority of the African countries.
Thank you, thank you. How many African countries have ratified the Rome Statute? Will they really arrest Putin?
I don't think so. First of all, very few countries support the idea of the International Criminal Court. South Africa, many of them actually, what happens is that they have been saying for decades that International Criminal Court only indicts the leaders of African and Asian countries and not anybody of the really guilty ones, such as the Americans. And the Americans have not joined the International Criminal Court, and Russia didn't join the International Criminal Court. Many African countries did. South Africa, for example, did join the International Criminal Court, but there is absolutely no chance that South Africa is going to arrest Putin anytime soon, particularly during his visit of the BRICS heads of state meeting, which will happen here very soon. We have precedent of that. The president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, who was in exactly the same situation as Putin, in 2015 visited South Africa for a meeting of African Union heads of state. There was outcry among the local media for the arrest of al-Bashir. But he quietly left the country from a military airport, and nobody said anything about it. Several local organizations asked for the opinion of local courts whether it was legal or illegal not to arrest al-Bashir. And the conclusion was that no, it was absolutely illegal for South Africa as a member of International Criminal Court to arrest al-Bashir. So they had to, they didn't, and even tried after that to leave the International Criminal Court. But again, the local the judicial institutions told them that it is constitutionally impossible for them to do so. Even if Putin comes, South Africans will find a way to ignore the decisions and indictments of the International Criminal Court.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question. Has South Africa provided any assistance to Ukraine, maybe the government or some kind of organizations?
South Africa is divided on this issue. There is mainstream media, which is utterly and completely pro-Ukrainian. The majority of the minority population, I would say, which is minority, I mean ethnic minorities, such as whites, Indians, coloreds, do support Ukraine in this war. One of the provinces, Western Cape, which is governed by the opposition party, Democratic Alliance, supports Ukraine to the extent that its government decided not to invite representatives of the Russian consulate to official ceremonies, and generally speaking, not to have anything to do with them. But the central government and the ruling party, the African National Congress, are very close friends of Russia, and they support Russia in this war. There were very many unofficial and official pronouncements by representatives of the ruling party about South Africa relying on Russia, supporting Russia, and being grateful to Russia for what it has done to South Africa, to the African National Congress during its fight against apartheid.
Thank you, Iryna. We got some questions from journalists. Please. Anatoly.
Доброго дня.
Good afternoon. My name is Anatoly Kosin. I'm representing Media Center Ukraine, Odessa. I have the following question to you. How do you think, do some African countries or just African countries are they ready to supply weapons to Ukraine? Because there are a lot of Soviet weapons in Africa, and including ammunition that we need so much now.
I'm not aware of any such supplies. So far, I have not heard of any such supplies. I may have missed something, but unfortunately, the two things coincide, meaning Soviet supplies of arms were to the countries which are now very warmly disposed, to Russia, such as Angola, for example, and Mozambique, and Egypt, and Algeria, and several other countries. So That is the reality. Unfortunately, I don't know. Maybe I have missed something, but I have not heard of such cases.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Excuse me. There may be one exception. There was a mysterious cargo ship, a Russian mysterious cargo ship, which docked in Cape Town secretly, and it did get some cargo under the cover of night, but nobody knows what it was, and it was certainly not Soviet arms because the USSR never supplied any arms to the government of South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess that's all. Iryna, thank you. Thank you for your time. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It was Iryna Filatova, Africanist, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor Emeritus at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. It was our last briefing for today. See you tomorrow, guys.